Yeah, this is my talk, Bypass Like It's 1999. So this is me. I don't like talking about myself a whole lot. That's probably the coolest picture I could find of a headshot of myself. So I had to go back and look and see if I could find a picture of me from 1999. And the closest I could get was this here with me being, antisocial, playing StarCraft in a room by myself. But enough about me. What we're talking about today, we're going to kind of take a trip down memory lane. We'll start in the 1990s. We'll talk a little bit about TCP, IP, and security controls. We'll jump to the 2000s, talk a little bit about HTTP and web browsers. The 2010s, we'll talk a little bit about PowerShell. And then we'll circle back around to today, do a little demo for you, hopefully. And all this in order to answer one question. Can 90s tools bypass EDR today? And I know that sounds like, a gimmicky headline from BuzzFeed, but I think that there's some stuff we can learn by going from 1999 to today and threading the needle of commonalities across different security bypasses. So just bear with me. But first, we got to go back to 1999 when, everything was awesome. We had, brick cell phones. We had great pop punk music scene, great movies. If you go back and look at the list of movies from 1999, it's pretty incredible. So, go ahead and pick your favorite 1999 reference, pop culture reference, music, movie, whatever. Throw it into the chat if you want, and just think a little bit about, reminiscing. Even if you weren't born yet in 1999, you may have some favorite thing from 1999. And I'm guessing that so there's something else that was really hot in 1999 that I'm guessing no one is going to mention as their favorite thing. But in cybersecurity, the new hot thing at the time was the intrusion detection system, or IDS. This was a big, network appliance that you stuck in line on your network, and it's going to look at packets and tell you if it finds bad stuff and alert you if there's bad stuff on your network so that you can do something about it. So, for lack of a better term, we're going to refer to the 1990s as the IDS era. And when I say IDS, I should clarify, we're talking purely about network IDS. I know that term has evolved to include host IDS and a bunch of other things now, but back then we're just looking at the network. First one I think that was commercially released or publicly released was in 95, but we had several these come out in quick succession. These are just some that I cherry picked. 1998 was kind of a big year. We had Snort, the open source IDS released, which is still very relevant today. We also had Bro IDS, which is now called Zeek, that came out the same year. And those are still things that you might use today. We also had the IPS, which is intrusion prevention system that attempted to block things and not just alert on them. And then, in 2003, we have Gartner finally report that IDS is going to be dead and gone in a few years, probably because all the investment money had been made at that point, and we need to move on to the next thing. Or, a less cynical take might be that while the technology is useful, it's eventually going to move into other products like firewalls and load balancers and things like that. And, there was some good functionality here, but of course, it was no silver bullet. And nothing exemplifies this fact like the 1998 white paper, Insertion Evasion and Denial of Service, published by Thomas Tchek and Timothy Newsham. They took apart, I think 4 different commercial IDS products and found all the ways that they were broken. And it's actually a really good read even today. I won't go through it with you, but you might want to take a glance at it on your own time because the principles are still applicable. Kind of the root a message I got from this paper is that there's a central problem when you're looking at trying to detect something on the network, because you're looking at packets. A packet by itself is not as important as what that packet is going to cause the system to do. So if you're a monitoring control and you're looking at that packet, you have to kind of try to predict how that machine is going to process the packet, and not just in isolation, but including the hidden state that the machine is in, and what packets it's received previously, and what packets it may receive in the future. So there's a lot of complexity to TCP/IP, and there's a lot of complexity in how those packets can be processed and reassembled and so forth. Just looking at the TCP/IP layer here, you can have a message broken up into numerous different packets, and when they are received, the machine that's receiving them has to reassemble those somehow to get a coherent message. That can include packets that have been delivered out of order that have to be reordered. That can include duplicate packets that have to be discarded, and lots of other complex stuff I'm not really going to get into today. But it's a very complex process of taking those packets and turning them back into a coherent TCP stream and getting a message out of it. And that's just up to the TCP level. There's also higher level issues with HTTP or other application layers that may cause additional complexity. So this is a hard problem, right? To look at packets on the network and try to figure out, how is the machine going to respond to it, and is it going to respond in a bad way or a good way? In fact, if you know the different idiosyncrasies of how different products process these, then, like in this white paper, you can craft a bunch of packets that will be interpreted different ways by different systems due to TCP window overlaps, due to other different, like I said, idiosyncrasies. So you might craft a message and a series of packets that gets detected as flight cub by our IDS system, but when it gets to the target system, it actually interprets it as fight club, which is the message that we would flag on. And this is a desynchronization between the monitoring tool or control and the production system. And this is partially an issue of parsing, which I'm not going to. I'm going to go with a very general type of definition of parsing here, just talking about the act of transforming data in order to understand and process it. These machines are parsing data in different ways. And if you think about it, parsing is everywhere. It's all around us. Even right now, as I'm talking to you on video, audio signals are going into the microphone, getting converted into electromagnetic signals. Then operating system drivers are taking those and turning them into bits and bytes. Then the operating system is running, software codecs to convert that into a different format, and then transmitting them over TCP/IP to your system, where it's happening in reverse. And there's a lot of complexity, so there's a lot of ways where things can get out of sync with the deconstruction and reconstruction of these, data formats. It's kind of like the show Fraggle Rock, which is granted not from 1999. This is actually a show from the 80s, although in 99, I think it was being rebroadcast on what would become the Hallmark Network. A little random piece of trivia. But the gimmick in Fraggle Rock is we've got these doozers, these little guys that construct this architecture, these buildings out of radishes, and then the Fraggles come along and they think those buildings are very tasty, so they eat them and tear them down, and then the doozers build them back up again. So there's this constant deconstruction, reconstruction. The interesting thing too is that the doozers, when they rebuild the buildings, they're never identical. It's kind of like a snowflake; it gets built up a little bit different each time. So from one construction to the next, there's a desynchronization. And desync or desynchronization, I'm just going to define this as a lack of consistency between two or more different perspectives, like a IDS or monitoring system, and the end system, the production system that's processing the data. And you can have this in real life too. Good example is one of my favorite 1999 movies, The Mummy, where we have the antagonist Benny think that he's in a good position because he's got all the horses, until the protagonist, from their perspective, says, "You're actually, on the wrong side of the river, so you're not winning. We're actually ahead of you." So there's two different perspectives of the same situation. So that's kind of the basic idea that I want to present today. This idea of desynchronization and how that can allow for security bypasses. My next example is from the 2000s, and that is the web application firewall. So we have in 2000s a lot of these web-based or browser-based attacks that start to occur, and the idea of a WAF or a built-in filter in your application just to stop the bad stuff from getting to the browser. So we've got several things that are released in this era. You might be familiar with mod security. It's a pretty important landmark in open source web application filtering. We also have a lot of commercial things that eventually get incorporated into load balancers and whatnot. One interesting thing, 2005, that we'll talk about, RSnake publishes his cross-site scripting cheat sheet to describe how to evade filters in these web application firewalls and in application level filtering. And this is actually the ancestor to the OWASP cross-site scripting cheat sheets we have today. Also, that same year, we had the SAMU worm. So obviously, cross-site scripting and cross-site request forgery attacks are much more in the public eye at this point. If we look at this cross-site scripting cheat sheet, we see the basic idea here is that if we're looking for bad stuff going to a browser, browsers are actually really complex. If you didn't know, browsers are doing a ton of stuff, millions of lines of code, and so there's a lot of ways to trick a browser into doing something that your monitor, your web application firewall or filter is not going to be aware of, because in order to be aware, you'd have to write something at the same level of complexity as a web browser. So there's all these different idiosyncrasies found of how browsers process things in weird ways. Even from one type of browser to another, there are idiosyncrasies. So we find lots of ways to bypass cross-site scripting filters and other attacks prevention techniques. You might have something like this, where we've got an image tag that has, a JavaScript call with alternating upper and lowercase, missing quotation marks, and then string concatenation that a browser is going to interpret again as our string Fight Club and pop up an alert box. But a security filter or detection tool might go ahead and think there's no problem with. Again, that desynchronization between two different parsing and processing engines. In 2010 and the 2010s, the example we're going to use is the anti-malware scan interface, which is a tool to detect bad stuff in PowerShell. So in 2010, we had this talk at DEF CON, which identified just how useful PowerShell was from a offensive security standpoint. It's installed on, all Windows computers by default, and there's really no inspection being done on PowerShell code. So you can write malicious PowerShell code, and it's basically a free pass for attackers. So this kind of blows up from Dave and Josh's presentation, leading to a lot of offensive PowerShell code released over the next decade. Until 2015, Microsoft introduces AMZ, which is, like I said, the anti-malware scan interface that's trying to detect bad stuff in PowerShell. And of course, almost immediately, we start seeing blog posts and talks about bypassing this because, again, security product trying to detect bad stuff that's happening in something like PowerShell is really difficult because PowerShell is um, basically a Turing complete programming language with a lot of its own idiosyncrasies, and we can make it do just about anything. Whereas the security control that's scanning this is going to have a harder time following all those idiosyncrasies. So we might have something, this complex block of PowerShell code that attempts to uh, decode a base64 string and then create a web client to download uh, that string as a URL and then invoke this all as a PowerShell expression. So we've got these nested things that PowerShell has to process. PowerShell is going to do fine with it and download the message, but AMZ or some other inspection engine may not be able to tell what that's actually going to evaluate to. So it has to just give it the green light. Again, a desync between security control and the production system. So if we fast forward to today, I think the king or queen of the detection controls is our EDR, our endpoint detection and response. This is kind of where we've landed as a local maximum on bang for your buck uh, threat detection and response because it's something we can install on all our endpoints, all our hosts that will monitor not just for um, static signatures, but also for certain types of threat indicators, API calls, behavior, and it also allows us to hunt across multiple hosts for specific things. Provides a lot of useful telemetry, and it's really actually pretty good compared to what we've had in the past. There's a lot of coverage that it provides, but of course, there's still some occasional gaps in what an EDR can provide on its own based on operating system telemetry that it gathers. So we have additions to EDR that get added on. One of those in particular is this idea of identity sensors. So identity um, is one of these add-ons to an EDR system that tries to provide additional telemetry, and a lot of it is based around network traffic. So augmenting what we can gather from the operating system and the logs in Windows or whatever with raw things that we can pull off of the network that are going to that host. And this may sound a little bit familiar because it's similar to what we're doing in the 90s with IDS. Oftentimes, the way this will work is we'll have a packet capture engine like libpcap that gets used by the identity sensor. And it's going to, and libpcap and these other things have kind of this iterative process of going through individual packets. So we'll call packet next, and it'll give us a packet, and we can scan that individual packet for bad stuff. And if we have, our string fight club in the packet, then we can flag that as a bad packet. And we know that maybe there's an attack occurring. The problem with this approach is if you just naively go and grab libpcap and do this, it will work pretty well because of the way that TCP kind of groups stuff together most of the time. But TCP can also be fragmented. You can break up a message into smaller blocks. And if we don't have some way to defragment it and reconstruct the stream, then we're not going to be able to match on that whole string fight club. We'll have to, if we're only looking at individual packets, we're never going to see the whole thing. And libpcap and other packet capture libraries are not doing this for us. So I'm going to run through a quick demo here. We're going to use the technique DC sync, which is a fairly common attack technique. We use domain admin credentials to pretend to be a domain controller, and then we make a call to an actual domain controller to get NC changes, which basically sends us a bunch of the password hashes for the domain. We could detect this on the network, and if you search for, detect DC sync, you're going to run across some articles that say, look for this on the network by looking for matching RPC calls. We're going to look for a DRSU API, header or whatever. We're going to look for operation number 3, and there's byte strings that we can search for. Whoops. There's byte strings we can search for to identify this. But we're assuming that all those byte strings are together. So another thing that we'll use is Frag Router. This is a tool that was released in 1999 by Doug Song. It's basically unchanged since 1999, and it tried to implement some of those attacks from the insertion, evasion, and denial of service paper. Conveniently, it's in Kali today. So this is our test lab here. We've got 2 Kali machines, one that's going to run the DC sync command, one that's going to run Frag Router, and then those are going to go to this domain controller, which is running an identity sensor. So hopefully y'all can see this. Here's our domain controller. For our identity sensor, we pulled this tool off GitHub, DC sync monitor service. That's going to basically just look for DC sync. We're going to run that, and it's going to be logging to our application logs here. And we'll also start running Wireshark just so you can see what happens. So on our Frag Router machine, Frag Router is a simple tool. You give it an interface and an attack. So our attack, we can do B1, which is no attack. It's just normal IP forwarding. We're not going to mess with the traffic. But we're going to use T3, which is going to chunk our TCP messages up into single bytes. And then over here, we're going to run the command impacket secrets dump, which is going to do our DC sync attack. All you have to do is apt install impacket to get this. We're going to run that, and it's actually going to take a little bit of time because if you see over here, Frag Router is taking our TCP packets and splitting them up into single bytes, which is kind of gross and messy, and it's going to take a long time. But that is going over here to the domain controller. And we will see that if we chunk this up into single bytes, we can't ever actually match, our identity sensor can't ever actually match on those headers and bytes that we're looking for. As you can see here, you got all these TCP packets with a single byte payload. And if we refresh our application log, there's some errors here, but there's no DC sync trigger. And just to show you there's nothing behind the curtain here, we'll do it again without the fragmentation. And I know we're coming up right on time, so this is the very end. But here we're just forwarding the packets normally instead of chopping them up into tiny bits. It's going to work again. Give us back the hashes. And if we go over here and refresh, we see this time it did detect the DC sync attack as expected. And over here we can see we have the full get NC changes request in a single packet. So that's why I was able to catch that. So final slide here, quick takeaways. Learn from the past, don't repeat mistakes. Specifically, and this is not an attack against this particular tool or anything like that. This was just an open source thing I found on GitHub. They worked hard to put this out, and there's nothing it's not an attack against any particular tool, but just understanding how things work. It takes a lot of effort to do that TCP stream reconstruction and all the difficult stuff of processing messages. So there's always going to be some of those idiosyncrasies that can be exploited. But if you're doing network inspection, I think it's important to remember that if you import libpcap, that's going to be your first step, probably not your last step. If you're a defender, just be aware of this for potential blind spots when you're looking at network telemetry. Try not to rely too heavily on one source of telemetry. And for offensive folks, you might try some of these fragmentation techniques on an engagement sometime against real EDR. You might be surprised at what you find. That's all I'm going to say about that. So that's it. I hope that was useful to folks. I enjoyed talking about this stuff today.
Yeah, absolutely, man. There was tons of throwbacks in that talk for me, so it was really awesome, dude. Thank you so much for being here and sharing that with us. We do have a bunch of questions. Before we get to those, though, if anybody is looking to join the next talk, all you'll have to do is go back to the lobby, and then you can join Hani and Chris Taylor for their talk on bypassing EDRs. But if you want to stick around while John answers a couple questions, please feel free to do so. But again, if you'd like to hit the next talk, just go ahead and go back to the lobby and you'll find the next presentation ready to go. So you ready to answer a few questions, John?
I will do my best.
All right, cool. Ahmed asks, do you think mod security is still relevant to the current landscape?
I think so. I'm not really an expert on WAFs. And I think a lot of that technology exists more based on how software gets deployed today in the cloud and whatnot. You're going to see, I think, a lot more of that in load balancing and cloud WAF stuff it's already going to be there if you're deploying to these cloud environments. So I think those might be a little more relevant, but it's going to depend on how you deploy your application. I think that from a research perspective, having those open source solutions is always important.
Somebody asks if they want to learn more about reading packet captures, where would they start? Do you have any recommendations? And Eric, feel free to answer this one as well.
Maybe Chris Sanders has a book on packet capturing, and I think he still does some training classes on that as well. Historically, that was something that was helpful to me. I think that packet capture book. So that might be a good place to start. It's a No Starch Press book. Can't remember the title off the top of my head.
No problem. Thank you.
1 second. I'll post it in the Discord chat in a few minutes. It's a tool we don't use a lot in digital forensics, but it's a really, really good one for analyzing packet captures from a visual perspective. As soon as I dig it up, I'll definitely shoot it over into the Discord channel.
This question came, I believe, probably when you were going through the demo, but they said, why would someone do this with Desync when they already have admin creds? That makes sense to...
Sure. So yeah, Desync would typically be something, if you're looking at the attack chain or attack kill chain or whatever you want to call it, it's something that you'd use in the post exploitation phase for persistence. So you might have admin access to the domain, but you might want to find ways that you can remain admin of a domain long term. And one of the ways that's helpful to do that is to dump a bunch of other account credentials and secrets, so that if the account you're using the password gets changed or access gets revoked somehow, you have other ways to get back in.
Thank you. There's quite a few other questions here, but I will share them with you so that you can maybe answer in the Discord. John, thank you so much for being here, sharing your time with us. I will share these questions with you, and we can get them answered if you have the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all, and we'll see you in the next session.